Hello, I am Kateri Smith, and I am going to present today on Forced Journeys, Native American Relocation in 19th Century English Language Sources. This was presented today, October 26, 2025, at the Narratives of Displacement International Conference held with the London Center for Interdisciplinary Research. And so here we are. The first, we have to go into a little bit of background about why this displacement occurred and the shift in perspectives. So, within the founding document of the United States, the Declaration of Independence, it calls Native peoples merciless Indian savages who basically wage warfare against any settler on the frontiers, and that was one of the main reasons given to separate from Great Britain. This was even in the areas where a lot of the native people were settled. Many had adopted Christianity, and many, especially in the north and southeast, practiced agriculture. And this is what it looked like on right before colonization in the areas. So we have many different language groups, distinct tribes, and distinct tribal identities. This was not a full small ethnic group or a unified type. We have everything from the Navajo in the Southwest to the Crow in the Great Plains and the Mohawks in New York State. These were very geographic regions, varied means and modes of life, and very different both religious and cultural practices. Many of these tribes would be moved to what is now Oklahoma. Some, like the Lakota, would stay in South Dakota, but largely many of the tribes would be pressured to move to Oklahoma, and many would be forced into Oklahoma. Here's a breakdown of the tribes. So we have the Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, Seminole, Cherokee, which we'll be focused on. And then we also have various Plains tribes, various tribes from the Great Lakes region and the Northeast. And then we also have a lot of tribes that were from kind of the mid-Atlantic. These were all put in without really considering any long-standing differences or even in many cases disagreements between the tribes. Much like Europe in the kind of Balkans. The first real push we have was started by Thomas Jefferson. The Republic was very much stable at this point. It was still a very new nation, but the foundations were already put into place that they could focus on other things. Thomas Jefferson, in this letter to William Henry Harrison in February 1803, basically gave two approaches. One, to incorporate with the settled population, basically what we would later term assimilation, or the other one is push them farther out to the Mississippi. Both of these would be tried, and in many ways, both of them would be actually done in a government policy. There was also his letter to the Brothers of the Choctaw Nation in December of that same year, 1803. He proposes to them that they settle down, they practice agriculture, and they also use Western clothing. Thomas Jefferson puts forward the notion that the settlers have expanded in a great way. So if they settle and assimilate, they will also multiply. He also promises some aid from the federal government to do so. This was in contrast to many of the Choctaws being settled. Many had adopted Christianity by this point, and a good few also participated in the plantation slavery system as masters. And here is kind of the territorial growth. So in the South here, we are getting into Choctaw lands. Cherokee lands around here had already been taken, and the expansion westward had begun. By 1823, the federal government's position had shifted, part of which is actually from William Clark, who, with the Lewis and Clark expedition, explored a vast amount of territory, which is now in the United States. William Clark then became in charge of Indian Affairs, what we would call the Bureau of Indian Affairs today. And with John Cass, he published this report to Congress in 1829. And they push for removal. They say that the natives are bound by superstitious notions, which tie them to the land, and that many will not sell the land. It also pushes for force if necessary. At the time of this report, the United States had pushed out. We were past the Mississippi River, and we were heading into parts of Texas and Oklahoma. In 1826, 3 years before the report to Congress, we start having the first written protests against removal. By this, some tribes had already been removed from their lands. This is Elias Boudinot. He was a Cherokee writer and newspaper publisher, and he sees what the Creeks have done. He is a Christian. He was educated in Christian schools, and he basically says it's inhumane for them to be removed. He also calls that some people want to completely destroy Native people. Shall red men live, or shall they be swept from the earth? With you and at this public at large, the decision chiefly rests. He is very well aware the position that Native people are in. He sees the expansion that the United States has been doing and is worried about his people. There are also others who are worried about this in this period of the 1820s through the early 1830s and beyond. Here we have the ladies of Steubenville, Ohio. They are also aware of both their own position as women without any political capital. They cannot vote. Many of them can't hold lands, and many industries are taken from them by either legal or cultural norms. They also are on the frontier. Steubenville, Ohio was set up around an Indian fort 41 years before this letter. They would have known the lived reality of people and the conflicts that Native people had within their own vicinity. They were not from Boston, where it had been settled for decades and decades. They say that the Indians have to the land of their forefathers in the face of solemn treaties the faith of the nation for their secure possession of those lands. They also recognize that removal was what the US government was intending, and that the federal government, the constitutional protectors of the Indians within our territory, and as the particular guardians of our national character, the government should not remove these people. They also echo Boudinot and later views that removing them will basically be a cultural genocide, if not an actual genocide. They also say that Indian removal will be a loss of American character to dishonor. It will look bad upon the United States for them to remove the original inhabitants. Those criticisms against the Indian Removal Act did not pass. Andrew Jackson, in his message to Congress on Indian removal in December 6th in 1830, called for the wandering savage to be removed, that they have no stronger attachment to his home than the settled civilized Christian, and that white settlers' views on the land should be more important. He also calls this liberal but generous. He also says that due to the fact that they do not want assimilation, that they should be removed and that the government will pay for it. He also echoes the statement that many others have before, that if they do not agree to removal, they will be annihilated. Or he says, perhaps utter annihilation. Again, he was talking about tribes that were largely settled and had been considered settled for a long time. They lived in distinct villages, and that many did practice agriculture. They were part of the plantation system. They adopted Christianity. They went to Western schools. This was setting up the wider scale for Indian removal across the entire continent. He wasn't only talking to those tribes which the US territory was now a part of, but also the territory that they would later acquire, or that he believed that the United States would later acquire. Many fought back. Here we have a quote: "You have guns, and so have we. You have powder and lead, and so have we. You have men, and so have we. Your men will fight, and so will ours, till the last drop of Seminole's blood has moistened the dust of his hunting ground." Indian removal shattered particularly the Seminole. Many fled to the Everglades in Florida, and some were removed to Oklahoma. The First and Seminole Wars would be and cause the lasting assimilation of the Seminole people. The United States' Indian removal was not without criticism from outside. In Democracy in America, published in 1835, we see the out the view of a European, a Frenchman, Alexis de Tocqueville, to Indian removal. He says it is impossible to conceive the extent of the sufferings which attend these forced emigrations. They are undertaken by a people already exhausted and reduced, and the countries to which the newcomers betake themselves are inhabited by other tribes that receive them with jealous hostility. Hunger is in the rear, war awaits them, and misery besets them on all sides. In the hope of escaping from such a host of enemies, they separate, and each individual endeavors to produce the means of supporting his existence in solitude and secrecy, living in the immensity of the desert like an outcast in civilized society. The social tie, which distress had long since weakened, is then dissolved. They have lost their country, and their people soon desert them. Their very families are obliterated, the names they bore in common are forgotten, their language perishes, and all traces of their origin disappear. Their nation has ceased to exist, except in the recollection of the antiquaries of America and a few of the learned of Europe. This forced policy of removal shattered many tribes. Many tribes were forced to combine with other tribes for their very survival, with whatever dominant language and culture being the one that these tribes were forced to take in. Many of the early tribes, especially in the North and Mid-Atlantic, would lose their language. And John Ross, the chief of the Cherokee Nation, in his letter to the House of Representatives, echoes these statements. He disagrees with the treaty. Partially, one of the signers of was actually Elias Boudinot, who was afraid of the genocide of his people and signed it believing that they would have more freedom. John Ross states that they are robbed of every element of freedom and every opportunity to defend themselves legally. Their property may be taken away, and physical violence can be done to us, and they have no recourse. Even one of the greatest American writers commented on the Indian removal. In 1838, already famous, he wrote a letter to Martin Van Buren, who was then president, on the situation of the Cherokee Treaty. He and the wider world were very much knowing that most of the Cherokee Nation did not agree to this treaty. It by no means represent the will of the nation, and that out of 18,000 souls comprising the nation, 15,668 have protested the treaty. By this time, the removals had largely already occurred, and the US government was not going to change that. Why? Why didn't they change it? Why was the removal in the first place? Gold. So in 1828, gold was found in Georgia on Cherokee lands. By 1829, a full-blown gold rush was in place, with many prospectors trespassing on Cherokee lands. The Cherokees did not have any recourse to this. If they tried to keep the white prospectors off of their land, they would be retaliated against. Legally, Governor George Gilmer passed an act to authorize Governor George R. Gilmer to take possession of gold, silver, and other mines in Cherokee country which was an act in the Georgia General Assembly in December of 1829. At first, he said that anyone helping the natives keep the prospectors off would have no authority, and that Cherokee law would not be abided by, and that they had to allow Cherokee people emigrating out of the territory. They wanted to make way for white settlement. He also stated in 1829 that essentially finding gold constituted what is now termed eminent domain. The state of Georgia now has the title to these lands and all of the gold and silver found, that the citizens of this and other states will be taken, that the gold will then be appropriated for everyone. This is, of course, not how it works. People did not give their gold over to the government and then be given out in some kind of rebate system, but it laid one that the native people were only occupants of the territory and not citizens, and that the state now has the jurisdiction over the Cherokee lands June last passed. It basically made it so that the Cherokees could not enforce their own laws on the treaty land which they were appropriated. The Cherokee Phoenix, slightly before that last proclamation, has been interested in the fact that they knew that they would be removed, and they state that the Cherokees will continue to be pretty stubborn. This is, of course, the newspaper of the Cherokee people of the Cherokee Nation. This would not come to pass. They would not continue to have their lands. It wasn't at the 1830 Declaration, the concept of manifest destiny was not given the term. It was not given the term until annexation in 1845 by John O'Sullivan. This said that white, largely Protestant people had a that manifest destiny of the United States was to overspread the continent allotted by providence, by God, for the free development of our yearly multiplying millions. This was removal. US, the white governing mostly male population, had the right to take land, or it would limit their greatness because they were destined to take over what is now the United States by God for themselves. So what's the next step? Many tribes were already being removed, and the expansion was happening at a rapid pace. After the Civil War, the view was that, as said by General William Tecumseh Sherman, we all agreed that the nomad Indians should be removed from the vicinity of the two great railroads then in rapid construction, heading across the Great Plains, and be localized on one or other of the two great reservations south of Kansas and north of Nebraska, that agreements, not treaties, should be made for their maintenance. for 10 years, during which time we believed that these Indians should become self-supporting. He was also in charge of many of the Indian affairs and many of the treaties after the Civil War. This would largely be true, although there are many more reservations than just the two, because many of what was Indian territory or uh, separated out for the reservations would actually be gradually reduced. There would not be a whole swathe of the country that would be reservation land. What more so came to pass was what was seen by Pratt, stated here in 1892. He said that a great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one. We saw that general. And that the high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. Pratt was the founder of the Carlisle Indian School, which for decades forced Native children, some were signed up by their parents, but many were forced to go to Carlisle, Pennsylvania, an area which very, very, very few of the tribes were native to, and forced them to assimilate. Out of every class, there were only 30 graduates, as many were seemed to not have assimilated fully. And this ranged from everyone who was a fourth native to fully native. And this was not some far off memory. This school in Carson City, Nevada, only closed in 1980. There are still graduates and residents of these schools who are still alive, who had children and grandchildren who went to these schools. The last residential school, federally supported residential school in Canada, didn't close until 1997, which was less than 30 years ago. Here are my citations. Thank you.